This is a session that I really, really enjoy because so much of our daily lives has to do with conflict and how we kind of manage and work through conflict. And so I think it's something that people don't kind of take for granted or think of in an exceptionally negative light. And hopefully, throughout this experience and being able to talk about it, you will be able to look at conflict in a slightly different way. Um, so we're just going to kind of get started here. And so we have a good sized group here, but I think I'll keep us together for now. And to kind of get us started, and again, you can put your answers either in the chat or y'all can just kind of speak up whenever you want. What do you consider a conflict? How do you handle conflict? Where do you feel like your conflict management style comes from? And do you feel like y'all handle conflict in a different way depending on who you're in conflict with? So like I said, feel free to throw the answers in the chat or just kind of share with the group by turning on your mic. We're going to start with this open-ended kind of conversation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Tenen. What do I consider conflict? Conflict is basically a disagreement, sometimes that it escalates between two people. How do I think I handle conflict? Personally, it's just the way how the situation, starts. If it's kind of a disrespectful, I'll stay my ground. I won't. It's been many a times that I won't, get disrespectful or use curse words. I'll just handle you in a nice situation and leave you to be mad at yourself. My conflict management style definitely come from my dad. My mom, she was like the nice, sweet, she'll confront you, don't get me wrong, but it's just the way that my dad, like how he handles conflict is the same way that I handle conflict in a similar way. And do I handle conflict in different ways depending who you are in conflict with? Yes, because if I have a conflict with my family member, for example, I'm not going to get disrespectful because at the end of the day, we're family. So I'm going to keep it respectful. But it depends if that person, wants to get kind of disrespectful, I will walk away because I am not going to do that. At the end of the day, we're family. We're going to love each other at the end of the day. So, and I know words do hurt. It's okay that we have disagreements with things, which I do understand. But like I said, with family, I'm not going to go cross that one line. For everybody else, it just depends how you come at me with trying to, it depends how you trying to come off the conversation with the conflict that we might have. So if you are respectful, of course, I'm going to show you respect. You're disrespectful. Like I said, I'm not going to get disrespectful, but I know how to handle people in a certain way. Like, okay. So yeah, it definitely differs depending on who I'm at conflict with, and of course the situation. So yeah, so it just depends.
Absolutely, thank you. Seeing from Carissa, conflict is a disagreement in any way. I get my style from my mom. I've learned to develop the ability to go into conflict trying to understand the other person. I handle most conflict the same, no matter who it is. All right. Any other thoughts? Any other answers for people?
Yes, I believe that conflict is a disagreement of interest or anything or any type of subject on any level. It could be professional, personal, or business. How do you think you handle conflict? Most people do try to avoid conflict. I would say I try to mediate through conflict or compromise or try to negotiate in differences. But a lot of times we can agree to disagree on subjects. Where does your conflict management style come from? I would say that mine um, would come from just from my education and professional work that I have learned in the professional arena of my life. So conflict management is something where you have to focus on solutions. So you have to be able to provide solutions to many different types of conflict. It could be personal, professional, whichever way that is. Being solution driven is what usually solves a conflict. A lot of times people, when conflict isn't implemented or embarked in their lives, they tend not to focus on a solution. So I believe that conflict management with me per se is usually always focused on providing a solution. There's always a solution to every problem. When you're going through a storm or a tornado in life, or a hurricane, whatever it is, whatever is being thrown at you, no matter how long those problems or issues take place, it doesn't mean that you can't get through. So you always have to see a solution towards the end of any conflict. And so the last part, do you handle conflict in different ways depending on who you are in conflict with? Yes, I believe that we all handle it differently. And the like personal life, if I'm at a family reunion and there's a big old disagreement, with the family, a lot of people are screaming and yelling at each other. And, it just really depends on if I'm at work and there's conflict, then we have to address that conflict in the professional manner because of the rules and policies and procedures that job have implemented. So those are my answers.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me see what else I'm seeing. Orlando wrote, conflict can be a disagreement on both party or maybe one. I'm not sure where my style of handling conflict comes from, but I try to handle it in a way where it's not violence because nothing gets resolved from that. And Amanda said, I also agree that conflict is a disagreement. I am not sure where I get my style from. It is unlike anybody I know. However, I do see that my son has my style as well. I avoid conflict at every chance. I would rather ignore rather than speak up when I am involved. However, if somebody I love has conflict, I am the first to stand up for them. Therefore, yes, it is. If it isn't somebody having conflict with me, I will walk away rather than address it. If it's involving someone else and I am present, I'll stand up for them. Yeah, so I think a lot of what y'all are talking about, and it's interesting, a lot of the time, because I've done this workshop a couple of times, one of the most common answers is typically parents in terms of handling conflict. That is a lot of what people talk about, is usually having gotten their style from one of their parents or their upbringing in general. I think that a lot of what y'all were talking about too, depending on who you're in conflict with. So at least for me personally, I know that the more emotionally invested I am, the way that I handle conflict changes a little bit. And so I find I have to be hyper aware of how emotionally involved I feel about a topic, because that might start to skew basically like the rational way in which I would kind of engage. And so I always have to be aware of that. And some of that is definitely when you talk about, at least for me, depending on who you're in conflict with, I typically am more emotionally attached to family and friends than I am necessarily, and it's not always that way, but than I am in professional environments, which I think in some ways does change the way that I personally engage in conflict. I also think when I think about like power structures, if my boss's boss comes in and we're in conflict, that looks different for me than when I'm in conflict with like a coworker. So those are things that I definitely notice as well. conflict is a disagreement or argument. Honestly, I avoid conflict as much as possible. I believe I get that from my father. I do notice that I handle conflict much differently when at work and personally. And then if you're passionate about something, it does change. Okay, so we've seen a little bit more. Hearing some notices around conflict avoidance, which is very much, that's a very common response to conflict. Out of curiosity, why, for many of y'all who wrote about avoiding conflict, why do you think it is that you generally avoid conflict?
Hi, my name is Simone, and I used to work at Nordstrom's for 10 years. And so my conflict management style would come from learning there because I became a manager at 18 years old. What was the question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I had mentioned that a lot of people had talked about avoiding conflict at all cost, or yeah, just trying to avoid conflict. And so I was just more so curious about, for those who would identify in that way, why is it that you attempt to avoid conflict?
I am the opposite. I personally like to tackle conflict head on because I feel like if people are internalizing it, then you are experiencing the conflict without handling it. I believe that most people avoid conflict because they maybe not want to deal with the person that's on the other side. I know that sometimes I avoid conflict with certain people based off the way that they respond. There are just some people that no matter how soft you are with them, they just don't respond well to being told anything about themselves that you may not like or that you have a problem with. So I personally avoid people that I feel like no matter how I'll try to get to them, it's just their way or no way. So those are the people that I do try to avoid contact with, people that I feel like don't have a mindset to want to resolve or come to a solution.
Come on, I am experiencing it right now. I work in a school environment, and it's that one parent. Basically, I was trying to let her understand what's our proper procedures and protocols when the weather doesn't allow children to, stand outside in case it's raining, whatever like that. So she kind of was frustrated. Make a long story short, I was being nice and basically telling her, like, ma'am, da 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 da, woo. And then she just snapped on me. Like she snapped on me. But I'm not avoiding the conflict, but I am, I was trying to handle her in a professional way as
Maybe
everyone was
invite,
talking.
maybe invite someone in.
Yeah, so what I've been doing, I've been avoiding her now because as you just mentioned, Simone, some people you just can't get to, and even with me still remaining professional, she still has her way of how she handles conflict, in which I can't escalate to that level because me being professional. So I just told my administrator, I'm like, you know what, it's not even worth it no more. And he explained to me the same thing that you was saying. It's like I try to get to her. Only how she handles conflict is just yelling and being disrespectful and cursing. So I'm like, yeah, I'm just gonna leave it alone. It's no, once you understand that certain people are raised a certain way and you can't get through a certain people, it's like talking to a brick wall. So I'm done, but I'm glad that I kind of said something to her because previously before me, this the same parent that has cussed out principals and other teachers. So I just want her to understand, like, I can handle you. I'm not gonna avoid conflict because at the end of the day, sometimes you need to speak up when, when it's time, when the time is right, because as I'm watching in the chat, I believe Deanna said it, sometimes you try to avoid contact because the situation might escalate or how you were portrayed, and that is so true. So I don't want people to portray me as being this professional person with, you know, this unprofessional vibe, and I'm not gonna do that. So I'm just gonna leave it alone.
So can I ask a question? I guess my question would be around, I'm hearing a lot of people say that I'll avoid it or I'm gonna remain in this professional manner. And to a degree, I agree with that, but I also think it is okay to be okay with yourself if you just don't like somebody. I can relate to you when it's a difficult parent, and I can be okay with being that parent. Just we don't vibe well, we just don't gel, and I can be okay with that, and not feel like it is a tense situation. I think one of the things I'm noticing in education is that our students are spending so much time getting along with everybody, so they don't understand that conflict is healthy. So if I were had to answer the questions, I would say that conflict really is it's a healthy disagreement that can escalate into a bigger issue. That's how I would define conflict. It's a healthy disagreement because we have to have those healthy disagreements. Like, I'm true to form on my side. I'm an Aries. I'm ready to debate you tooth and nail. We can go all night if we have to. I order food. We can get in.
I got an Aries, so I understand your vibe. I got an Aries right behind me, my daughter. But I can agree with you. And that's the thing that I'm learning as well with conflict. It's like you said, it's okay because we're learning to see things from a different perspective so we can understand who we are as an individual when it comes to handling situation, whether they're personal or professional. So I'm learning because I even, like I was just saying, I even took her perspective. I'm like, well, maybe she's having a bad day. You know what I'm saying? Some people don't express themselves in a healthy way when they're having a bad day. So I'm kind of thinking now outside of the box. So like, okay, maybe she's having a bad day, or maybe, you know, she just never got confronted. Because some people think because they yell that someone is supposed to be afraid of them. And once they see someone who's not afraid of them, like myself, because I look like I'm quiet. So now when someone else comes to you using a different tone, because I'm not going to raise my voice. I got kids, you know, students are watching me as well. So I have to be an example. So I can't sit there and be unprofessional or cuss you out in front of them. That's not right. But how I handle the situation, some people can't respond to calm and respectful people. They're only used to people who's going to get right back loud with them, have that same attitude, curse, be disrespectful. So I think that's also another trigger for conflict. Some people, like I see everyone say, they just don't want to issue the conflict in front of certain people because their style. So like I said, I just left that lady alone. I said what I said.
Depending on the type of conflict that arises determines how we should respond. You know, like we have to be mindful that it's not about how we feel necessarily. It's about understanding that conflict is inevitable. And so since we know that, we have to keep that at the forefront of conflict management, you know, and avoiding conflict, in my opinion, only sometimes makes things worse. So it just really depends on how self-aware we are of what we're internalizing and how willing we are and wanting to bring that conflict to a resolve. You know, some people are okay with letting it linger, so they're willing to avoid, you know, conflict or avoid trying to come to a resolve. But we just have to think forward with trying to have a conflict resolution mindset, because that's what society needs, conflict resolution.
And again, with my problem, I do want to come to her because like I said, I done told my administrator, I don't have no problem with, I don't have, you know, I just want to come to a solution. But even if we don't talk again, like I told the administrator, She doesn't have to like me. I understand that. I don't, when I go home, I'm going by myself. But while I'm here on earth, I just need to be respected. That's all my clear message is. And at the end of the day, even if we still have our disagreement, I still respect her because at the end of the day, she is a parent at the school, and that's my professional is to help her if she needs help. So that's why I'm trying to resolve our little conflict. But so far, we just don't say anything, which is I'm okay with that. But if it does come to a conflict again, I will be the bigger person and see if me and her can sit down and come up with a solution, because maybe she is going through something. So I kind of, like someone said, I'm kind of like the peacemaker. I'm not gonna go back and forth with you all day. I said what I said, you said what you said, and if we both are grown, we can come to a solution to the problem.
Absolutely. So seeing a lot of good stuff in the chat. And some messages I've seen before, some conflict is just simply not worth engaging in. I think that, yeah, I'm seeing some stuff around getting nervous about how you might be perceived, opportunities where conflict can arise because of just miscommunication and not, I will say, sometimes it is tough in this, I don't even know what world we're in, if we're in COVID, if we're not in COVID or wherever, but sometimes it is tough to read emails, particularly with someone who you might not know very well. It's like, did I just get a tone, or am I reading the tone, or like, is it there? Because sometimes yes, my eyebrows go up and I'm like, what was that? And then, yeah, there are, depending on the nature of the situation, there is potentially ramifications for conflict if it's not handled properly. And so that's something to be to kind of note as well. I think I saw Deanna raise the hand.
Yes,
So
yes,
we'll
I
do one
did.
more and then we'll go to the next slide. Let's go.
Okay, I was just going to conclude with what you were saying, that some conflicts do need to be avoided. I do agree with a lot of the things that Christina and Keisha was saying. You do have to, you do have to confront conflict when it's needed, but it's all depending on the type of situation. You want to be able to have negotiation practices when it comes to conflict to try to create, sort of a resolution. However, a lot of conflict can, become physical. It can become like a dangerous situation where it becomes unsafe for you and everyone else around you. So I think that, we just have to be able to sort of sense when it's time for us to avoid certain conflict, especially when it's escalating and not de-escalating.
And yeah, that's a very
Yes.
important point too, making sure
I
that
agree.
we have to look at, yeah, is there a physical danger? And so that's definitely something to think about. So what is conflict resolution? Conflict resolution is a way for two or more parties to find a peaceful solution to a disagreement among them. The disagreement may be personal, financial, political, or emotional. And so I'm actually, at this point, I am going to split us into two groups for a couple of minutes. And I want you all to think about steps. So if you had to create basically a checklist of steps you would need to take in order to successfully resolve a conflict, what would those steps be? And so I'm gonna put us into a couple of groups, just so that y'all have some time to kind of connect. Probably just 5 or so minutes, and just come up with your checklist for what specific steps that you would take to resolve a conflict. Does that make sense? Everyone know what we're doing?
Yes.
All righty. So just about 5 minutes, and then we'll go. All right, so it looks like everyone is back. I'm curious if groups want to share out sort of what y'all came up with.
I'm voting Carissa. She did an excellent job with providing steps of basically how to solve a conflict with two parties.
So yes, I believe that we were group 2. They provided the information. All I did was record it. But basically what our group came up with is the literal steps. So 1, cool down. 2, revisit at a later time. 3, consider the other person's point of view. 4, create understanding. And 5, compromise to form a win-win solution.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Does group 1 want to talk about this?
Yes, our group just sort of came up with conflict resolution, like in the work culture, or we could actually use any situation when it pertains to the conflict, but these are the steps that we wanted to take in order to resolve the conflict. So the one is acknowledge the conflict, address the issue with the person. I believe that was Simone has said that some things are better left unsaid. You know, should we just leave the situation alone in its entirety? 5, we could actually mediate, compromise, and create solutions towards the conflict, and actively listen, be open-minded and not anxious to speak.
Yeah, I think that part is always interesting to me because I can't remember who wrote it. There's some sort of famous quote or whatever that talks about how we've learned to listen to speak as opposed to listen to understand. And I know that for me, I certainly do that from time to time. And in conflict, that's never really going to be a good way of navigating through it, because if you're listening just to know what you're going to say next, you're really never going to understand the person that you're in conflict with.
And usually when I sense that there is conflict, I usually, if someone is trying to, you know, talk over me or monopolize the conversation, I just say, you know, are you anxious to speak? Because if you are, go ahead. You know, so, you know, it kind of like place more accountability on them for showing their listening skills and, you know, trying to actually negotiate through conflict or mediate or compromise, whichever word you want to use for that. But a lot of times when we are in conflict with other people and there is a disagreement, we're not actively listening to the other person. A lot of times we're anxious to speak, sort of like intercepting what they feel or not fully listening to them. We're just hearing the words and not, you know, showing that we are compassionate about what they feel, because we, in order to subdue conflict, we need to show that we are compassionate about what the other person feels, that we respect their feelings in a way that we can actively listen to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's super important. So I did come up with a kind of list of how to successfully resolve conflict. Again, this was me doing the exercise myself. So it's not necessarily saying this is the right way of doing it. A lot of what y'all talked about, I think one thing in particular that I really think is important, y'all mentioned culture. And sometimes I always forget that all of the information that I give is within the context of the culture that I was raised in. And so it's important, it really is important to note that there are cultural differences depending on your upbringing, where you're from, all of that kind of stuff that you definitely want to take into account when you're thinking about how you engage with people. Because, you know, what I'm talking about is how to engage and successfully resolve conflict in the cultural elements in the society that I was raised in. But that's not necessarily, you know, the keys to resolving conflict for someone else who might live halfway across the world. So I definitely think that that's an important thing to consider when you're looking at, okay, who's the person I'm engaging with? And part of what y'all were talking about in terms of learning and really seeking to understand what they're saying will help you in navigating, even if there are some cultural differences. And so with my list, I wrote, really do your best to try to understand the conflict. You know, why is there a disagreement? What's going on? Doing your best to communicate with the opposition. Start to brainstorm actual resolutions. Work together to be able to pick whatever the best resolution is. And if you can't do that with just whoever's involved, then you definitely can look to use a third-party mediator and explore some alternatives if those resolutions didn't originally work out. And sometimes there'll be situations where not everyone is super happy, and that's fine. Then you kind of have to learn to sort of cope with those situations and the pressure that comes around with it, in the hopes that you're able to manage that situation as best as possible. So that's kind of the list that I came up with. I'm gonna have us watch a video real quick. I will say, when I share the audio on my computer, you might hear the rainstorm that is currently coming down hard. So I'm gonna try to close some windows here. But if there are any issues with the sound, please let me know so that I can adjust.
What is it about conflict that makes it so difficult to deal with, and how come good people can turn into such monsters in the face of conflict? The most common way of dealing with conflict is to avoid it. Some people walk away, others get really upset, wind themselves up and attack, and others just get sick or go on stress leave. In fact, it's amazing what people will do in order to avoid conflict and the emotional stress that comes with it. There is a very clever saying that goes like this: denial is not a river in Egypt. Denial is, however, one of the most common problems when it comes to resolving conflict. When confronted with a tense or difficult conflict, too many people smooth it over, bury their head in the sand, and the conflict goes on for another 1, 2, or 3 weeks, months, or even years in some cases. I want to introduce you to a definition of conflict and then give you a pathway for the resolution of conflict. Before I do, I want to say this. For some people, even the word conflict means warfare, dead bodies and blood on the streets, and it's very common for women and men to see anything less than that as not being in conflict at all. So this is a definition that starts at a very low level, because most conflict starts out as very small upsets and builds and grows into a full-scale battle. So here's the definition. Conflict exists when one person has a need of another and that need is not being met. Now, don't be fooled by the simplicity of this definition. The resolution of conflict starts from here, and the first step is to express the need. The second step is to find out if the need can or cannot be met. If the need can be met, then we have resolution. If it's a no, then we negotiate to resolve the conflict, or we go into the management of conflict. So here's the problem. Most people go straight from having an unmet need into the management of conflict, bypassing step 1 and step 2 because they are afraid and don't talk to the people who can do something about it. And that's not pretty. In fact, it gets quite ugly. So here's what the management of conflict looks like: sulking, withdrawing, getting sick, the silent treatment, backstabbing, gossiping, shouting, blocking, being aggressive, and getting angry. So the resolution of conflict starts with expressing your unmet need and then finding out if your unmet need can or cannot be met. If your conflict has escalated to the stage where it's too tough or sensitive or difficult to handle, then you really need to think seriously about involving a neutral third party to help you mediate the dispute, and we can help you out with that. For more information, please call me, Jeff Muir, on.
So what do y'all think of that?
That is the definition of the way my conflict is going on. Her niece, her niece basically wasn't getting mad because she kind of didn't like the protocol that we used for the school, but instead of, as they said, expressing in a positive way of how she can get her needs met, even though I basically helped her with her needs to make her understand why we do things in a certain procedure, why we follow procedures and protocols. But I guess she wasn't hearing it, and her the way that she expressed herself definitely was part of conflict. So yes, the way that the video described, that is definitely the way how my problem escalated. So I agree.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts? Okay. I actually love this video, and I think, you know, I can't remember if I mentioned it at the beginning, but a huge chunk of my job is student conduct, student issues, student concerns. And so much of what I've learned through this process is I actually love to, you know, get information about what's going on in the situation. And then one of the first questions I usually ask is, what do you feel like you need? And I actually really like it because it's it's almost for me exactly how this video is. Can I meet that need? And I like to be able to address that almost, you know, right at the beginning, because I find people get even more frustrated if you've had a 45-minute conversation, they express what they need, and you're like, oh no, I actually can't do any of that. It's easier for me to be able to say, oh, okay, this is what you need. You know, here are the options, and what you have just discussed is something you need. I'm not able to accommodate that, but this is what I can do, kind of save time and be able to seek to understand sort of where people are coming from. I also like it because it starts with the unmet need. And I think a lot of time when we were starting at the beginning of this conversation, I was hearing words like negative. I'm hearing we're so accustomed to thinking about confrontation in a negative light, as aggressive, and realistically, where most of that confrontation comes from really is unresolved conflict resolution. The idea that there is a series of individuals who have unmet needs, and kind of letting that boil over to a point where it does become really like anger inducing or stressful, because we've let it sort of boil as opposed to addressing smaller things as they come. It's different, never knew it was different terms. Yeah. Any other thoughts before we move forward?
Yeah, I think that there's really an opportunity here to really teach kids, especially overtly, how to resolve conflict early on, because these are strategies that can be learned. They're behaviors that can be learned. And I think we just sort of take it for granted that people and children especially will figure it out. But I think there are specific tools that can be used or taught that would really benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and right, I just wanted to give space in case, but that's something that I talk to with students all the time, is a good chunk of the purpose of this program really is, it's not necessarily that we're going to give you a toolkit of mind-blowing information, but even if we present things in a slightly different way or give you a bit more information that you can take with you in your personal professional life, hopefully you find something that's helpful. Because I think someone just wrote, you know, I didn't think of conflict in that term. Well, you know, prior to doing a lot of work in conflict resolution, I hadn't necessarily thought of it in that way either. And so even if it's a small tidbit here and there, hopefully you get something out of it that you can take back to work. So for those who have never heard of it before, there's a tool that I usually use. And of course, as you get with a lot of these kind of great assessment tools, they become very, very popular, and then they become very, very expensive. So I'm trying to find a way to be able to allow for people to take this full-on assessment, because I think it's super, super awesome. But I'm pretty sure it's like $50 per person. So I'm still trying to figure that out. But the assessment that either you did take prior to this point or will take in a second is based on this tool. And so the Thomas Kilmann Institute Conflict Management Style. So basically what Thomas Kilmann had suggested was that we are all a certain level of assertive and cooperative in terms of our conflict management style. Many of us, for example, if you are more equally cooperative and assertive, you would find yourself in the compromising space. If you're equally assertive and then you're super, super assertive and then super, super cooperative, you would be in a collaborating space. If you're not much of either, or if you're super, super assertive and not really cooperative at all, you would get to a competing. Or if you don't really care about conflict at all, you're like, I don't want to cooperate or be assertive, you avoid, which is what a lot of individuals do. And so I'm gonna did everyone have a chance to complete the assessment? If not, it only takes like 5 minutes, so I can drop the link in the chat to give each person a couple minutes to complete the assessment. Has everyone done it, or do we need some time to do it?
I completed mine.
Okay, so we need some time.
I think I have to do it, yeah.
I completed it.
So for people who have completed it, I'd say you get yourself like a 5-minute break to wander. For people who haven't done it, I just dropped the link in the chat. It takes, like I said, 3 to 5 minutes. So we'll take a 5-minute or so break while people can complete their assessment, and then in about 5 minutes, we'll reconnect. Sound good? Cool, cool. how are people doing? Do we feel like we need a bit more time, or has everyone gotten a chance to complete it?
Yeah, I got a chance to complete it.
I completed mine.
I have a couple more questions to go, maybe like 30 seconds.
Okay. We're going to go over a couple of the different options that could have happened. If you're still working though, feel free. We're just going to kind of go over some categories. So like the assessment that you actually took was a derivative of the TKI, which is why we talked about it. And there are a couple of different options in terms of where you would have rated. As you would see, and I think that's important with all confrontation styles, is it's not as if you were just fully one style. Most of us operate with multiple styles, and depending on situation or what we're receiving in feedback in that particular situation, we might flip from style to style. And so you have the constructive confrontation, which basically a person intends to achieve their own goals and interests, but at the same time, they're not ready to cross the line. So they're not going to use condemnable methods. You're not going to be like swearing at people, hitting people. You're going to be gathering information about the opponent and their capabilities. Look for logical arguments to kind of expose where they're at, and then use previous experience in similar situations. And so for individuals in a constructive confrontation, a quote unquote winning in conflict means positively affecting the self-esteem of the individual and increasing chances of success in other situations. For destructive confrontation, and I will say, thankfully, I have not had too many experiences with this kind of personality type, but I do get one every once in a while. And it's an individual who, and if y'all have seen them, they have made their decision and they are sticking by that decision no matter what. Does not matter. They don't care how they have, what means they have to use, what if they have to swear, if they need to throw things around. They don't particularly care. There's not typically a willingness to listen to the other person. And usually if you have ever had an experience with someone who works in this kind of style, it's not typically a positive experience for anyone involved. You have cooperation, which is a combination of strength and cooperation. So a person who tries to find a solution that would satisfy both individuals to the fullest. And so to do this, these are the kind of confrontation where you're really delving into the conversation. You're really trying to figure out what's going on, why the person that you're engaging in the conflict with is feeling the way that they're feeling, and then trying to find a way to resolve that conflict in the best way possible for both people at the same time. Compromise, and so sometimes depending on the nature of the argument, how significant it is, and it's similar to cooperation, but another kind of competition, or it's a compromise between competition and adaptation. And so this is someone who sometimes you're just like, it's not worth it, fine. Just here you go, like, have what you need. I'll take kind of the hit, you take sort of the bare minimum, and you keep it moving. You're ready to sort of get to the end of that confrontation because you just don't really want to work through it again. And then of course there's the avoidance. And you just kind of are just like, whatever. And I will say there are certain, when people do studies on conflict, there's a lot of people who say, like, if you're working with individuals who you feel like you're never going to work with again, or the issue at hand really isn't that quote unquote a big of a deal, sometimes it is better to just simply avoid it because you're never going to work with that person again, or it's the situation at hand means so much more to the other person than it does to you. So avoiding it is actually, in some ways, in these situations, the most effective way to manage it because, hey, I don't really care. And then finally, the adaptation. So this might be someone who is indecisive, but they kind of want to cooperate. They're ready to sort of completely neglect their own interests to please someone else. And they really don't want to ruin the relationship. And so this is slightly different from the avoidance, because this might be an individual who you're going to be regularly working with them. And so the adaptation is more so you're adapting to whatever it is that they need, because you are, say this is, like I said, this is your boss's boss, and you're like, well, there's not really a whole lot I can do right now. And at the end of the day, they're my boss and I have to do what they need. And so rather than potentially piss them off or make things more difficult, I'm just going to adapt to their style and adapt to whatever it is their needs are. And we're just going to kind of keep it moving. And so for me, after having taken it, I had 83% constructive confrontation, 8% destructive confrontation, which is not a surprise to me because that's just not my cup of tea. 91% cooperation, 41% compromise, 33% avoiding, and 41% adaptation. So thinking about your scores is, what are some initial thoughts, or was anyone surprised, or kind of what are people feeling based on the results that they have?
Go ahead, Deanna.
Oh, okay. So
I
mine
see your hands
was,
raised. I didn't want to be rude and just start talking.
mine was cooperation, and I don't know how accurate that is, because I do challenge conflict. I when I make a stance on an issue, I stand firm in my stance. I can hear your side of the story, but usually when I've come up with a conclusion to what I feel, I am very strong in my stance. So when it says it has a combination of strength and cooperation, and the person tries to find a solution, yes, I do focus on solutions, but I do keep my stand. So I don't know how that would be like considered sort of cooperation. Is it because it's saying that it's creating like opportunities just to resolve issues, or is that, resolving it on both sides of conflict? I don't know how I was in that category. That's all.
I think, and this is just me and my understanding of it, I think the idea is not necessarily that you're, not willing, or that you're going to just throw your needs to the wind. I think the idea is based on what they're describing. And so you could say, no, that's not me at all, or I agree. The idea is more so you will want to understand where the person is coming from, who you're having a disagreement with. And the idea for you is not necessarily that you're going to steamroll over them and be like, and this is how this is happening. You know, at the end of the day, you have what you need, what you're looking for in the arrangement. But you're still willing to listen to them, and you don't want them to walk away feeling like they have lost the entire like the whole situation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And Jordan, it appears that I have a 91% in the cooperation bucket, which was kind of funny, but I like the description of it being the combination of strength and cooperation. So it's cooperation with a kind of steeliness to it. So it's not just the completely adaptive, avoiding a kind of mindset, but it's more of having the resilience and the strength along with the cooperative mindset.
8 minutes.
Yeah.
8. Mhm.
Other thoughts that people are having based on what you saw?
After taking mine, I think mine's basically hit on a head. Like cooperation was like a high number for me. Being able to solve and understand the solution, I mean the conflict or the solution was kind of high, and that's kind of like me. So like I said, mine's kind of hit me right on the head of how I resolve conflict.
I wonder how this would change if other people were scoring us. I mean, it takes a certain degree of self-awareness to be objective enough to get a true read. But what if someone else were doing this as they're observing us in various social situations? Would the results be the same?
I think about that all the time, to be honest, about like any any time that I do any level of an assessment. It's kind of like, well, this is, at least for me, and it might be getting like too abstract, but I'm always like, this is my perception of how I think I'm doing these things. But to what extent I'm actually doing that, I feel like we live in our head. So it's probably easier almost to have people who are closest to you describe how you would do it as opposed to doing it yourself.
I agree. My results were that I was cooperative, and I believe that to be true. But my avoidance level was very high, and I think what comes off as cooperative is just me trying to avoid the conflict altogether. Like you said, I'm just trying to get it over so I can move on. Like, so my whole awareness of it is that what do you need to be okay? Because I'm gonna be good regardless. So I'm just trying to give them what they need so I can move on.
I'd have the same thing, Carissa, that I have really high scores on avoiding and the compromising. So avoiding, I think the better word to use to describe both of us, it's not avoiding, it's prevention. I think we try to prevent the conflict to happen. That's what I'm thinking.
I like that. You just definitely helped me understand that. That makes sense. You're not avoiding it. You're kind of preventing something from, escalating to something that we may not want it to escalate at a certain level. So I like that. Thank you.
I'm gonna have to be honest. I think that's our cop out because we don't like to say that we avoiding it, but technically, by trying to figure out how to get out of it is avoiding it.
Well, I think it depends on what for me, it always goes down to what is the conflict and if, is it worth it? And so I think I've worked with quite a few people who are exceptional avoiders. They avoid everything like the plague. But they just genuinely don't necessarily, they don't see the value in, there's like, I don't care. Like,
Right, no, that is
it's just like a
exactly
literal, like,
how.
I don't care. And so live your life, do whatever you gotta do. I don't care.
Right.
And-
That's
and-
exactly how I am. So, but that's not technically avoiding it.
Oh no,
It's
no,
just
that's avoiding.
reality.
That's the
Okay.
avoidance. Like, and I think again, when we talk about conflict and style so much, you can get an avoider, and there's a quote unquote like a negative connotation to avoidance. But I also think there are times people are just like, I don't care. And you know, I had a coworker who got into arguments with no one because he would just look, we'd be having a conversation, and I'm sitting there heated. I'm like, oh my God, this is how I feel about this and this and this. And he's just like, cool. Like, is that how we're gonna decide? No, because you know, it's like I got stuff to do. And it never, and I always thought, I was like, wow, there are some times where I feel like I have an opinion on everything. So I would love to have that style sometime. But I guess I say it more so because when we talk about conflict resolution, there is definitely times where avoidance is bad. Like it's not constructive. But there are also times where I think there's a strength in avoidance, and it's just like, whatever, keep it moving.
It's not like that, because right here it says they do not protect their own interests. It's not like that. We avoid conflicts, prevent conflicts. It doesn't mean that there's some, I think, as for myself, I think I have what I needed. I have what I wanted. But if the co-workers or something, they said, oh, they don't like this policy or blah, 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 like that. And I was thinking like, oh, that policy didn't get to me. I think that's fair. Then I won't try to jump in with them to confront the company or something like that. And also on the other hand, I know that the company, they look in the bigger picture, that they're not trying to do like a personal favor for the staff, that if they think that policy is not favoring them, just like one or two people or something like that. Like, I feel like some people, they just want to keep arguing for it. But to the fact that, like, just like the clocking policy or something like that, some staff, they come in like a few minutes late or 10 minutes late, they will argue that that is a strict policy. But to the fact point that is fair, like as they state the time, that is the time. So those conflicts, I would not want those conflicts to happen, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay. Just because I just turned the mic on. So I think for me, I definitely avoid conflict because not only for the other person, but for myself, because sometimes I can tell when I'm not going to respond in a correct way. So to avoid it, like I don't want it to escalate, and I could tell where my energy is going. So I'm like, okay, let me just avoid the situation. So sometimes you could just tell. It's not even.
So you having any of this?
Is someone? Oh, I'm hearing someone else. I thought someone was talking. So yeah, I think avoidance is it just depends on the situation. It depends on who it is. It depends if it's at work, if it's personal. It depends on the relationship that you have, that relationship, how important that relationship is. And do you want it to further escalate if you feel like it will?
Absolutely. Let's see what we got in the chat. Certain situations aren't worth trying to get a resolution on, so avoiding will be the best thing. Yeah. Okay. So we'll do one scenario just to sort of be able to find a way to apply what we've been looking. Actually, let me first for attendance purposes, if everyone could click that link, and the password is going to be trouble. Or the code, I should say, is going to be trouble. So let's do that really, really fast, and then we will start to wrap up. Have most people gotten a chance to put in the password?
I'm doing it on my
Yes.
phone and I don't have my student ID.
That's fine. Just fill it out to the best of your ability.
It won't let me go through because it requires it.
Just put in like N00, blah, blah, blah.
Trouble is the code.
The code is trouble.
It was successful. I was able to do the attendance.
There you go. All right, so as people continue to do that, we'll start to get to
Yeah,
the-
mine's is not working. I'm sorry. I clicked on the link. I'm sorry. Sign in.
I got you, you're okay.
It's telling me my email address.
Yes.
Yeah,
Are
you
we-
have to sign in.
Can we use our personal email? Because that's the only way mine is connected with Google.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Right. Say the password. Say the- So when we put our email in here, then we should type in our school's email.
It's whatever email that you use to get primarily contacted.
Passcode is time.
I'm sorry?
What was the passcode? Trouble?
Trouble, yep.
Okay. Okay, thanks for completing your contact information. Okay. All right, mine's is completed. Do we have to do that each time we conduct a Zoom with Golden Eagles?
Yeah, we'll have a different one for each session. It's
Okay.
just the easiest way to get attendance in. So as for people who are still doing it, feel free to keep doing it. We will start looking at the scenario, and I'm just curious about what people would think based on all of that, you know, those lists that we came up with in terms of steps in resolving conflict and what people think. And so we have scenario one: you get off on the wrong foot with a new coworker. They ask you for help responding to a customer inquiry, but you refuse to lend a hand because you are working on a tight deadline and don't want to waste time. There's been tension between you two ever since, and now you need their help on a project, but they're not being very responsive. So what do y'all think you would do? What are some next steps in this situation?
I think that it would be good for her to start off by being light in the situation and letting her know, like, hey, girl, so the other day when I wasn't able to help you, I was on a tight deadline. Did you get everything covered? You know, like just maybe try to go back to the situation, especially if she thinks in the door that there's tension between the two of them since then. And also, if she needs help, she also has to not be prideful enough to ask for help, because it does say at the top that she refused to lend a hand, but it doesn't say that it was anything bad on her end. But I also believe that she has to be willing to put her pride to the side, because the real task at hand is work. And so when it comes to work, I don't think that that's something that she should let get in the way of what she has to do.
Yep, I agree with Simone. Kind of just go back and, you know, try to ease her tension and say, I apologize that I was able to help you, explain the deadline, and, you know, tell her I'm sorry if it caused confusion, you know, try to give her a little bit of empathy, because she may, what we might think is one thing is actually another thing. So we might think, she might have thought that we were just, you know, ignoring her or whatever like that, but you can let her understand the correct situation, so she can be like, oh, okay, and kind of, you know, make her, you know, understand in a very empathetic or using sympathy for her feelings to kind of, you know, ease down, so she can be able to respond in a correct manner.
Yeah, I think attention has to be paid to the relationship and mending the relationship, because obviously they are co-workers, they're colleagues. And so even the definition of the word colleague, there's an implied contract with that word. So if there's tension, that's the elephant in the room that needs to be addressed. And at some point, they've got to have a real honest and transparent conversation.
I think I would just catch the next time that I will have a chance to help her, then help her that time. Then she will realize that, oh, last time it was really just my tight schedule. It's not personal or something.
I had actually had a situation like this when I had worked at Lowe's. And I actually had to sit and reflect, because I did the exact same thing. We got off at the wrong foot. She asked me for help, and I kind of was like doing a couple things at once. So what we end up doing was having a conversation with our manager, and what could have changed the situation was explain to her at the moment, like, hey, I have a deadline, I can't help you, but what I can do is get somebody to help you really quick. That way, then later down the line, it could go, hey, we kind of got off on the wrong foot. Was you able to get that resolved? Was that other person able to help you, versus that person actually figuring out by themselves what they need help with? Because most of the people that come in really don't know what's going on. But with the situation with me, exactly the same way, it was more so like, oh, I needed help, and she couldn't even get me nobody to help me. So I thought about that later down the line when I start having new hires that I have to train, try to provide them with all the information, and then resolve any issues, so it don't be no other conflict between us. But for this scenario, I just would have explained, I kind of got a tight deadline, but so-and-so would have been able to help you, and then get that person to help them really quick, finish up with your deadline, and then swing back around and ask, hey, how did that go? So that way that person just don't feel like you had a personal interest towards them.
That's good.
Yeah, okay, I think, again, that's important. Many of what y'all were talking about was definitely getting to a stage of acknowledging where they were coming from, trying to get an idea of where their feelings were, and being able to sort of share with them the experience, hopefully, to alleviate some of that. And this is an example where a complete avoidance of the conflict probably wouldn't have worked out exceptionally well, because this is a person that you have to work with, and so you will need each other from time to time, and so to ignore it completely, you allow opportunity for that relationship to continue to kind of get negative. So there's some other scenarios, and I can kind of send them along at a different time, but I want to be cognizant of time, so I'm going to go through some additional tips, see if there are any last minute questions, and then give y'all the eval so that you can let me know any suggestions that you might make. So in all things conflict, I think just baseline steps, the most important thing I would say probably of anything is just listen. And I always say listening, and particularly affirmation, like being able to listen and affirm what a person is saying, okay, I hear what you're saying, I get that. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're saying that they are correct, but I do think that there is value in hearing what a person has to say, and being able to say, okay, there are some times where I hear some people saying some I'm like, that was out of left field. But a lot of the time when I'm working with students and I'm working with other people on my team, even if I don't agree, I can understand where it's coming from. And so that's kind of where that affirmation and that response comes from. And then there's the addition of the information, hey, I understood that you needed something from me. I was on a really, really tight deadline. And so that was part of the reason why I couldn't assist in that last matter, but hopefully I'll be able to assist you in further situations. And so again, that's not, whoops, you were right and I was wrong. It's just, hey, this is what was going on. I would probably be frustrated too if the shoe was on the other foot. Let's, be aware of kind of where our workloads are and try to avoid that in the future. And so some of this feels cliche to me at times, but honestly, I think it's true. You listen with respect and care. And you listen in, I think earlier in the session, we talked about body language. And so listen to their, with your ears. And so you can hear, are they raising their voice? Is their voice cracking? Do they sound sad? What's kind of going on, to give you a little bit of insight into where they are. See what pay attention to where they're at. And so if they're looking at the floor because they don't want to, they don't feel enough confidence to look you in the eyes, or if they just look like they're kind of shoulders are down and they just look kind of understand that kind of you can have a disagreement with a person and that's entirely okay, and that you will be on the other end of that at some point. We've all been at stages where I'm like, crap, I messed that situation up. And so I think that level of empathy is what I take when I'm listening to other people. Even if I disagree with them, I'm still listening to hear kind of where they're coming from. So the affirmation, we talk, hear you, I heard you, I understand, again, doesn't mean you agree, just having an open mind, addressing the issue. If sometimes I just love to just ask further questions, like, why, what's making you feel this way? What makes you feel like that's a better option? What's going on here? And just letting people speak so I can get a better idea of where they're at. And if I disagree at the end, then I'm able to say, this is, I disagree for these different things. But again, I was giving them an opportunity. And then, yes, as you probably have seen throughout even this presentation, I'll add some personal stories, information, just to contribute and make everyone kind of aware that, if I haven't been in the exact situation, this is sort of what has contributed to where I'm at now and why I approach conflict in the way that I do. Here, again, some people think this is super cliche, but I think it's so important to use I statements. The moments where I found myself in really, really heated confrontation with individuals that hasn't particularly gone well has been like, well, you're an a-hole, or you do this and you're doing it on purpose and blah, 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 blah. And you just start getting into this weird cycle of throwing emotions onto another person that you don't, you might feel that way, but you don't know where they were coming from. And so it's much more difficult to just completely throw away. And what I find is, when you do this, or when you say this, or this happens, I'm feeling this way. Or, when you've done this, I think it's because you like this person more, or I feel like you're taking me for granted, blah, 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 blah. And you're able to really open up the conversation because you're talking about where you're at and what you're feeling. And so I do that all the time in personal and professional conflicts, just so I can be able to own where I'm at and be able to say, this is, again, those unmet needs. This is what I need in this relationship. So are there kind of questions, thoughts, feelings, before we, like I said, I would love for everyone, if you can get a chance, to complete the evaluation so that I can continue to do, to continue to improve and make the program better. I think in my line of work, I have just seen that there just aren't enough conversations about conflict. We all experience it so regularly and we kind of know that it exists, but like we talked about at the beginning, people do really, for the most part, like to avoid it, but I think that just makes more issues later. And if we are all better able to articulate and work through conflict, I think the work environment, your personal professional environment improves in a pretty significant way. And so that's part of the reason why I actually love having conversations around this topic, because I think it's something that we all experience regularly, but don't talk about a whole lot. So I would love to be able to continue to improve. If things are going well, then say, yep, or if things can be improved, then talk about what can be improved. Otherwise, if there are any questions or thoughts at all, the floor is yours. Okay. So hopefully